consciousness project, you have discovered incredible things. So random number generators behaves differently when a dramatic outcome happens in the world. What is the most important result of these experiments and is still going on?
Well, I think the most important result is that for something close to 20 years, we persistently found changes in the data which were correlated with big events that important to human beings. Now, I could pick out one event or another event and say this is the most impressive, but in fact, the thing that to me is most important is that the phenomenon is no accident. It didn't happen once and then go away. We as scientists do, we tried to, you might say, get rid of the phenomenon, but it doesn't go away. If it doesn't, if you try to do the best science you can, and the phenomenon still shows up in your data, then that's pretty good evidence that there's some real phenomenon in the world. And I don't know how much I should just continue, because you may have a bunch of better questions, but I think the outcome, the bottom line result means is actually quite meaningful. Excuse me. It means that we are connected in some way that we don't really understand. We don't perceive it either. There's some kind of deep-lying unconscious connection that brings everybody in the world into a kind of group mind or a global consciousness, as we call it. And this is not, in some sense, a very great surprise from an intellectual point of view. If you are familiar with history of cultures in general and religions in particular, every one of them says at one time or another the same thing about human beings. We are all one. We are all connected to each other and to the universe in some unified fashion.
Okay, it's great. Some materialist scientists in Germany believe that our team did not interpreted this data correctly. What is your opinion to this meaning?
You mean, did you say there are scientists in Germany,
yes,
who think I did not integrate or interpret the data?
You're not correctly interpret the data.
Aha. So maybe they have a better interpretation. Well, I mean, I can grant that there are multiple interpretations which are possible. But I think the best one, and this is based on my experience setting up the experiment, knowing how it works from bottom to top, and processing the data for 20 years, I have a great deal of experience with it. And so I have considered, seriously considered interpretations like, it's all an experimenter effect. The experimenter somehow intuits by knowing results in the future, that is precognizing events in the future or the outcome. I picked the right time to start the experiment so that this result from the future will manifest simply because the data have ups and downs. And if we start our collection or start our event exactly at the right time, we will just by chance, or not by chance, by precognitive design, we will pick exactly that segment of data we need to prove our thesis. I think that's one way to think of it is I don't know what the German word for this is, but it is not a parsimonious explanation.
Do you think that our consciousness is a part of a larger intelligence system?
I think that our consciousness is indeed part of a larger system, and in fact is a kind of manifestation of a universal consciousness. I'm not alone in believing that consciousness is a kind of fundamental in the universe, like space and time. And that before anything else, before even space and time, there had to have been something like consciousness. But that's a very grand and different kind of consciousness than we think about. We think our consciousness is something that emanates from the brain and can be trained to perform musical pieces or to invent clever mechanisms and so forth. But our consciousness is really a much larger thing than most people imagine. Our consciousness is not just stuck inside the body. It extends out into the world. And we have, not my experiments alone, we have evidence for 100 years, scientific kinds of evidence, which are all pointing in the direction of saying consciousness is not just a materialistic manifestation of your brain juices flowing. It's more than that.
Is this reality a virtual reality you live, as described by Tom Campbell? Tom Campbell wrote a book, My Big Toe, and she said, we live in a virtual reality.
In a virtual reality? Well, I have I have a lot of respect for the people who imagine that we are all living in a virtual reality, but I find it once again a very unparsimonious explanation for our being. It depends in some sense on what you mean by a virtual reality, but most people think as soon as that discussion comes up, I believe most people imagine something like a great computer programmer on some planet on some galaxy far away that is creating this incredible virtual reality that has us in it. I think that's ridiculous.
I think with our senses, hear, smell, taste, and see, is always not a direct contact to our outside, and our body is creates reality outside of us.
We're now getting into the territory where I think I have to always say we have to be defining the terms that we're using. What do you mean by reality, and what do you mean by virtual? Mm-hmm. What do you mean by inside and outside of something like, is the shell of my skin the dividing line between inside and outside, or is it something different? Perhaps a set of experiences, memories, expectations, and predictions, and so on. I mean, we're talking about a grand assembly of all kinds of possibilities. Now, I'm not much inclined to believe that there's anything artificial, and in a sense that's one of the kind of implications right away when you see virtual reality. It's something created artificially by an agency without, an agency that's external to the creation. That's what I imagine virtual reality means.
Okay.
So, I mean, I haven't read Tom Campbell's argument, and I know that I know 2 or 3 people who talk about this possibility that we're all living in a virtual reality. And as I said before, I have respect for their achievements and their intellectual flexibility and so forth, but it just doesn't seem to compute. I mean, why do we revere nature? Why does nature heal us? Is it because that's part of the virtual reality plan? Or is it because there's some direct manifestation of nature in us that resonates with the nature when we confront it? The bird singing, the brook babbling, the rain pattering on the roof. All of these things are, why would we need a virtual reality for something like that? It's much simpler to say, there is rain falling on the roof. Not a program making me believe that there is, making me in the first place, and then making me manifest the belief that there is rain falling on the roof. I think it's much simpler to say there is rain falling on the roof.
Okay.
Interesting question. Thank you.
Think you that our body, our avatar, can more involved, become more consciousness and more peaceful in the next time, in the next step of evolution?
I think one of the words you said was more peaceful, and what was the other one? More.
Yeah, for 5,000 years, we humans have fighting in each other and waging wars. We have 10 commandants, and we know how we live friendly together, but we can't do it. Stop our body this reaction, what we think?
Well, I'm an eternal optimist. And among other things, I appreciate the data from experiments like mine, the Global Consciousness Project and the results, and a lot of other people's efforts to understand the human person, the human being, and the human capabilities. So a lot of these things are pointing toward the possibility that we can control our lives, that we do have free will, that we are able, and in a strong sense, to become, to intend to become, and therefore intentionally to become better at being human. So I think one of the most poignant and powerful outcomes of research like the Global Consciousness Project is that it points to the possibility that we human beings are capable of conscious evolution. And if that's true, and I see hardly any reasonable argument that is not true, if we decide to become taller, we won't become taller. But if we decide to become more peaceful, that's possible. Okay. If we decide to become wiser, we can work on that. It's possible. So in other words, there's a great deal of potential which we can unlock and manifest if we accept that the consciousness that we have is ours to, this is kind of an involuted notion, but our consciousness is ours to command. We are not robots. We have looked at 100 or maybe a little bit more than 100 events. Okay. They're not all meditations with that, that orientation, but they're like meditations. They may be a demonstration for peace, okay, where all the people are focused on manifesting peace in the world. Or they may be maybe something like Earth Day. But the idea that they all manifest is something like a potential increase in the harmony over the whole globe. That's what meditations, these giant or group meditations, are often designed to do, is to help us achieve a more harmonious world. Maybe not with that as a particular intent, but as the transcendental meditation people said long ago and attempted to test in experiments, when a large number of people meditate together, their synchronous meditation, even if it has no expectation or intention to spread out, it does spread out. The manifestation or the result of the meditation is not confined just to the small group, but it sends out, you might say, waves of information, calming waves of information into the surrounding community. There's two different levels of that where I have done experimental work. One is what you might think of as a small group, people who become synchronized and resonant with each other because of something like a ritual that they're participating in, a ritual that really causes everybody to do the same thing in synchrony. or if they all go to an opera and listen to one of the great arias. Everybody is transfixed. Anybody who is awake and paying attention is feeling the same feelings of love of this music. And if we go to a speech by a very charismatic speaker, we may all be drawn into the same mass. And now we have done experiments for years, which we call field REG or field RNG experiments, where we take one of these instruments into such a group situation. We make the prediction that during periods of coherence, or resonance, when the group forms a real group, then we will see changes in the data. And if people ask me why I think that's the case, I think it's because that resonant group includes also the random number generator in some way that we don't really understand. But the information that links all those people also links the random number generator. Now, the same thing, but magnified in terms of the numbers of people involved, and also the size of the measurement instrument. My network has maybe 60 or 70 random number generators spread around the world. So the instrument's bigger in a way, and the crowd is bigger, but the manifestation is the same. When people are brought by any kind of an event, and including ones they design, like the meditation as a group, when we all decide to become one with each other or become coherent in a group activity, then we create something in the universe, in the world, which is to which this network of my instruments is sensitive. And again, I think it's a little bit like that network becomes a part of this group of human beings whose consciousnesses and emotions are linked with each other. So it kind of becomes an included part, and thereby is able to absorb information, structuring information from that group of human consciousnesses.
Okay. Why do you think when change the worldview from a materialism worldview to a holistic worldview, or each other? Today we have a materialism worldview. Do you understand me? Our worldview is materialism today.
Oh, okay.
And we need another part. We need a holistic worldview or a global consciousness worldview. I don't know. What is the next step in scientists to these things? What is the next? What is the next worldview?
I think science needs to have an open mind. So if you say we all have a materialistic view,
yes,
I think that is that's a limiting perspective. So what if something like the memory of my mother isn't so materialistic? What can I do about that? Or what about the love I feel for my child? That love, you know, and some of the philosophers of consciousness go even simpler. They will say, what about the color red? How are you going to deal with my experience of the color red? What is your materialistic view going to, how is it helping? So there's, in my mind, nothing wrong with the materialistic view as long as those who hold it don't believe that they've got the whole picture. It's just not the complete picture. There's, you know, what is consciousness? How do you deal with consciousness in a materialistic view?
Illusion.
Yeah.
It's conscious illusion, eh?
Or a virtual reality. Oh my.
Oh, yeah.
But you know, it's amazing to me that people argue so strongly for such limited and limiting views. as this materialistic notion that consciousness, for example, is just an illusion. Oh my.
It is so much proof in the world about mind over matter, and don't change the worldview. Es gibt so viele Beweise für Geist über die Materie, dass Geist Materie beeinflusst. Und dennoch halten die Wissenschaftler immer noch an diesem materialistischen Weltbild fest.
So I think I'm understanding that there are, you're again telling me about people out there who have such a strong materialistic view that they cannot believe that the mind or intention can change the way the world is. Is that right?
Yeah.
I don't believe that. Why? Because I've been studying the effects of consciousness in the world for 40 years. For 20 some years, almost 3 decades, the Princeton University Engineering School had a laboratory called Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, usually called PEAR lab.
Yes.
The point of which was to bring our engineering technology, the best experimental designs we could manage, and statistical sophistication, to bring all that to bear on the question, can my intention change the way a simple machine operates? And the answer to that question was yes. In one experiment after another, one machine and a different machine and a third machine, and in other kinds of experiments that are related. So in other words, to my satisfaction and to the satisfaction of almost anybody who actually reads the literature, lots of skeptics don't. They know it's impossible, so they don't read the experiments. They have no idea of the sophistication or the means and the manifestations. They really have no idea what's going on. And they say, nope, it's impossible. So I can't believe that Geist can Einfluss auf Materie. But why? Because that's a philosophical conviction. Mm-hmm. It's not a scientific notion. Our work is scientific. We do an experiment that says, here's what we plan. This is the experimental design. We start at this point and we end at this point. And then when we predict at the end of the experiment, we will have demonstrated some kind of phenomenon that is unexpected if you're a pure materialist. And it turns out that our prediction is correct. Not always, but more often than it should be.
Yeah, a lot of scientists in the world have these experiences. Dr. Dean Redding, like also these experiments, mind over matter. No?
Right. Have you talked with Dean?
Yes, for 2 years ago in Germany. Diese Weltsicht, diese materialistische Ansicht, ist es nur bei uns in Deutschland so festgefahren oder ist es in Amerika auch so? Oder weil ich habe nur diese Sicht hier in Deutschland und wenn ich mit jemandem spreche aus Amerika, dann sagen die, ja, bei uns ist es nicht mehr so festgefahren wie bei euch in Deutschland.
Well, I think that this sort of, I'm going to use intemperate language, because I think this is a plague, the notion that materialism has explained everything and is all the explanation we need for anything. I think that's a plague, and that it is more dominant in Germany than it is in the US. Okay. But we have more than enough. We may have the worst president in the world, but we also we also have plenty of scientists who are convinced that in the last part of the 19th century, not remembering now, there was a physicist, a very famous physicist, might have been Lord Rayleigh or somebody like that. He was like a leading physicist. He said, we know practically everything. All we need is to fill in a few blanks. This was in 1890. And in 1895, Planck discovered a way of explaining black body radiation. And in 1905, Einstein broke the standard paradigm into small pieces with the theory of relativity, special theory. And then the general relativity came later. And not long after that, we came to understand that there's a whole quantum world that these people who were imagining it was all done, except for a few dots on and T's to cross.
Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Hans-Peter Dürr, diese ganzen Wissenschaftler sagen, die Basis von unserem Sein ist nicht Materie, sondern eben Bewusstsein oder Geist. Aber das wird hinweggefegt, immer noch. Ich verstehe das nicht.
Ja, ich verstehe es auch nicht. The truth is, no, I think I said, maybe I didn't say it very clearly, but it bears repeating anyway. A very good scientist has an open mind. A very good scientist, I believe, knows that there is more to learn. We do not have the whole picture. You know, it's like a giant matrix of hundreds of cells this way, hundreds of cells that way. We've got a bunch of them filled. We've got a lot of information, but there are all these empty cells that we have no idea what's going on there.
Yes.
And you know, things like the questions about what is consciousness and how can consciousness come to exist? Those kinds of things, not even close. The people working at the edges, like so-called parapsychology and engineering anomalies research, those people are pushing the edges far enough that we can fill in one or two of these boxes in this giant matrix, in a helpful way. But people who are convinced that they know all the answers, they're helpless. We cannot help them.
Okay, we have a lot to do in the next step of our scientists.
Absolutely. You know, wouldn't it be a terrible shame if we had all the answers? I mean, wouldn't it be something if we finished the last sentence and put a punct and that's it? I don't think that's happening anytime soon. No.